Victoria Frost clutched her coffee mug tighter as she flipped through the case file, her brow furrowing with each damning document that confirmed what she already suspected. Westridge Technologies was guilty of patent infringement, and she was going to prove it in court. The small tech startup she represented, Neurasoft, had developed a revolutionary AI algorithm that Westridge had suspiciously replicated in their latest product line. It was David versus Goliath, and Victoria lived for these battles. Her phone buzzed with a text from her paralegal. Westridge's CEO is handling this personally, taking over from their legal team. Victoria rolled her eyes. Another entitled executive thinking he could steamroll the proceedings with his presence. She typed back, "Good, let him waste his time. Won't change the evidence." The afternoon sun streamed through her office window, highlighting the diplomas on her wall: Harvard Law, summa cum laude, and various accolades from her 6 years of practice specializing in intellectual property law. At 32, Victoria was already making a name for herself at Donovan and Pierce, one of Boston's most prestigious firms. She'd earned her reputation by being meticulous, relentless, and unintimidated by corporate giants. She closed the file and glanced at her watch. The preliminary hearing was tomorrow, and she needed to prepare. Victoria packed her briefcase, nodded goodbye to her colleagues, and headed to her apartment in Back Bay. That evening, as she reviewed her notes one last time, she couldn't help but wonder about this CEO who was suddenly taking a personal interest. The company profile only listed him as William Blackwell, 35, with a generic corporate headshot that told her nothing about the man she'd face tomorrow. No matter, she'd faced plenty of arrogant executives before. This one would be no different. The courthouse steps were slick with morning rain as Victoria ascended them the next day. Her charcoal suit was impeccable, her chestnut hair pulled back in a sleek bun. She spotted her clients, the founders of Neurasoft, waiting nervously in the lobby. "We're going to be fine," she reassured them with a confident smile. "Your patent documentation is rock solid." As they entered the courtroom, Victoria noticed a tall figure standing by the defense table. He turned as they approached, and Victoria felt an unexpected jolt. William Blackwell was not what she had pictured. Instead of the middle-aged, overweight executive she'd imagined, she found herself looking at a man with intense blue eyes, strong jawline, and an air of quiet authority that seemed more earned than inherited. He extended his hand. "Miss Frost, I presume?" William Blackwell. His voice was deep, his handshake firm. Victoria maintained her professional composure despite the unexpected flutter in her chest. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm surprised to see you taking such a hands-on approach to this case." "I believe in addressing problems directly," he replied, his expression unreadable. "Especially when they involve the core of my business." Before she could respond, the bailiff called the court to order. As they took their positions at opposing tables, Victoria shook off her momentary distraction. No matter how unexpectedly compelling Westridge's CEO might be, she had a case to win. The hearing proceeded with preliminary arguments. Victoria presented her evidence methodically, highlighting the timeline of Neurasoft's patent application and the suspicious similarities in Westridge's product. Throughout her presentation, she felt William's eyes on her, studying her with an intensity that was both unsettling and exhilarating. When it was William's turn to speak, he surprised her again. Rather than delegating to the attorneys flanking him, he stood and addressed the judge himself. His argument was articulate and well-reasoned, suggesting that the similarities were coincidental, the result of parallel development paths common in the tech industry. "Your Honor, Westridge Technologies has been developing this algorithm independently for 3 years," he stated confidently. "We have documented proof of our research timeline." Victoria narrowed her eyes. This wasn't in their disclosed documents. The judge seemed to share her concern. "Mr. Blackwell, if you have additional evidence, it needs to be properly submitted to the court and the plaintiff." William nodded respectfully. "We're prepared to submit all documentation immediately, Your Honor. There's been no deliberate withholding, merely a misunderstanding about what was relevant to the case." The judge scheduled a follow-up hearing for 2 weeks later and ordered Westridge to provide the complete documentation within 3 days. As the court adjourned, Victoria approached William. "Convenient timing on that research timeline, Mr. Blackwell," he raised an eyebrow. "I assure you, Miss Frost, there's nothing convenient about it, it's simply the truth." "I'll be the judge of that when I see the documents," she replied crisply. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I would expect nothing less. You're as formidable as your reputation suggests." Victoria was taken aback by the compliment. "You researched me?" "I make it a point to know who I'm dealing with," he said. "Harvard Law, 5 successful patent cases against companies larger than mine. I respect thorough preparation." 6 cases, she corrected automatically. 6, he acknowledged with a nod. The Merrick Industries case wasn't widely reported. Impressive work. Victoria wasn't sure whether to be flattered or unnerved by his knowledge. "Well, Mr. Blackwell, I hope you're equally thorough in preparing those documents. My clients deserve justice." "And they'll get a fair hearing," he promised. "But so will my company." As they parted ways outside the courthouse, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that this case had just become more complicated than she'd anticipated, and not just because of the legal arguments. 3 days later, a courier delivered a thick package of documents to Victoria's office. She spent the weekend poring over Westridge's research timeline, looking for holes or inconsistencies. To her frustration, the documentation appeared legitimate. If it was fabricated, it was expertly done. On Monday morning, she was surprised to receive a call from her receptionist. "Miss Frost, there's a William Blackwell here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." Victoria frowned. "Send him in." William entered her office carrying a sleek leather portfolio. He looked even more imposing in casual business attire, a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, no tie. "This is unexpected, Mr. Blackwell," she said, not rising from her desk. "I thought we might discuss this case informally," he replied, taking a seat across from her. "Perhaps find a resolution that benefits both parties." Victoria leaned back in her chair. "Are you here to offer a settlement?" "I'm here to offer clarity," he countered. "May I?" He opened the portfolio and spread out several technical diagrams. For the next hour, he walked her through Westridge's development process with surprising technical expertise. Victoria listened attentively, asking pointed questions that he answered without hesitation. "You seem to understand the technology remarkably well for a CEO," she observed. A genuine smile crossed his face. "Before I was CEO, I was Westridge's lead developer. This algorithm, it's not just corporate property to me, it's something I helped create." Victoria felt her perspective shifting slightly. "That doesn't explain the similarities to Neurosoft's work." "Great minds often reach similar conclusions when solving the same problems," he said. "But I understand your skepticism." Their conversation continued through lunch, which William ordered delivered to her office. Victoria found herself increasingly engaged not just in the technical discussion, but in William himself. He wasn't the corporate shark she'd expected. He was passionate about innovation, articulate about complex concepts, and surprisingly willing to acknowledge the legitimacy of her concerns. "What if," he proposed as they finished their meal, "we arranged a meeting between our technical teams, complete transparency, your experts and mine comparing notes in a neutral setting?" "Why would you offer that?" Victoria asked, suspicious. "Because I'm confident in our position," he said simply. "And because prolonging this battle hurts both companies, resources that could go to innovation are being diverted to litigation." Victoria considered the proposal. "I'll discuss it with my clients, but this doesn't mean we're backing down." "I wouldn't expect you to," William replied with that hint of a smile that was becoming frustratingly familiar. "Thoroughness is what makes you excellent at your job, Miss Frost." After he left, Victoria sat at her desk longer than necessary, processing their interaction. There was something about William Blackwell that defied her expectations. His willingness to engage directly, to explain rather than intimidate, was refreshing. But was it sincere, or just a more sophisticated strategy to undermine her case? The technical meeting was arranged for the following week at a conference center downtown. Victoria arrived with NeuraSoft's founders and their lead developer, prepared for an intense day of technical discussion. William greeted them in the conference room, accompanied by his own team. The atmosphere was tense initially, but as the developers began sharing their processes, the conversation took on the excited tone of passionate technologists discovering common ground. Victoria observed from the side, occasionally consulting with her clients. During a coffee break, William approached her. "Your thoughts so far?" he asked. "It's illuminating," she admitted, "but I still have questions about the timeline." "Walk with me," he suggested, gesturing to the hallway. They strolled through the quiet corridor, maintaining a professional distance. "Why did you really take over this case personally?" Victoria asked suddenly. "Most CEOs would delegate this entirely." William considered her question carefully. "When you build something from nothing, when you're there for every failure and breakthrough, you develop a protective instinct. Westridge isn't just my company, it's my life's work." Victoria found herself nodding. "My clients feel the same way about NeuraSoft. That's why I respect them, even as we oppose each other," he said. "They're creators, not opportunists." They paused by a window overlooking the city. For a moment, neither spoke, both contemplating the skyline. "You know," William said finally, "in another context, I think we might have had a lot to talk about." Victoria glanced at him, catching his gaze. There was something there, an invitation, perhaps, or a recognition of something unspoken between them. "Unfortunately, Mr. Blackwell, this is our context," she replied, more gently than she intended. "William," he corrected, "and contexts can change, Victoria." The way he said her name sent an unexpected warmth through her. She turned back toward the conference room, maintaining her professional demeanor. "We should rejoin the teams," she said, but couldn't help adding, "William." By the end of the day, Victoria had to acknowledge that the meeting had shifted her perspective. While there were still concerning similarities between the technologies, the development paths did appear to be genuinely independent. She needed time to reconsider her approach. That evening, as she packed up her notes, William approached her again. "Would you join me for dinner?" he asked. "Strictly professional, of course. I think we might be closer to a resolution than either of us expected." Victoria hesitated. "I don't think that would be appropriate while the case is ongoing." "Fair enough," he conceded. "Perhaps coffee tomorrow with both legal teams present." She agreed to this more formal arrangement. But as she headed home, Victoria found herself wondering what dinner with William might have been like, away from the constraints of their professional roles. The next morning's meeting was productive. William proposed a licensing agreement that would acknowledge NeuraSoft's innovation while allowing Westridge to continue using their version of the algorithm. The terms were surprisingly generous, including both financial compensation and a collaborative framework for future development. "This could be beneficial for both companies," William explained. "Rather than competitors, we become collaborators in advancing the technology." Victoria's clients were cautiously receptive. "We need time to consider this," they said. "Of course," William agreed. "Take the week." "We're not going anywhere." As the meeting concluded, Victoria found herself alone with William again. "This is an unexpected turn," she admitted. "Is it?" he asked. "Sometimes the best resolutions come from finding common ground rather than proving who's right." "That's not typically how corporate disputes work," Victoria said skeptically. William smiled. "I don't run a typical corporation, Victoria." She was beginning to believe him. Over the next few days, Victoria worked with NeuraSoft to analyze the proposal. She also, against her better judgment, found herself researching William Blackwell beyond the case files. His story was impressive. He'd started Westridge in his garage after dropping out of MIT, built it through genuine innovation rather than acquisition, and maintained majority ownership even as the company grew to a valuation of over $2 billion. When she presented her analysis to NeuraSoft's founders, they were inclined to accept the deal with minor modifications. Victoria arranged another meeting with William to finalize terms. This time, they met in Westridge's headquarters, a modern building with open workspaces and surprisingly casual atmosphere. William gave her a tour before their meeting, proudly showing off the development labs and introducing her to key team members. "You've built something impressive here," Victoria acknowledged. "It's the people who make it work," he replied. "I just provide the environment." In the conference room, they quickly reached agreement on the modified terms. As they signed the preliminary documents, Victoria felt an unexpected mix of emotions: satisfaction at the resolution, but also a strange reluctance to conclude the case that had brought her into William's orbit. "We should celebrate this resolution," William suggested as they wrapped up. "Dinner." Now that we're no longer on opposing sides. Victoria knew she should decline. The case wasn't technically closed until the judge approved their agreement, but something made her nod. Dinner would be nice, she heard herself say. William took her to a small, elegant restaurant overlooking the Charles River. Away from the conference rooms and legal documents, their conversation flowed easily. Victoria found herself laughing at his stories of early startup failures, sharing her own journey from small-town ambitions to Harvard Law. "Why intellectual property?" he asked over dessert. "Of all the lucrative fields available to someone with your credentials," Victoria considered the question. "I believe innovation deserves protection. Ideas matter, they change the world when properly nurtured." "That's what drives me too," William said, his eyes holding hers. "Creation, building something meaningful." There was a moment of silence, filled with something electric and unspoken. "This is dangerous territory," Victoria said quietly, "because of the case. Because I make it a point not to blur professional and personal boundaries." William nodded, respecting her hesitation. "The case will be officially closed soon. Perhaps then we could revisit this conversation." Victoria smiled. Perhaps. True to his word, William maintained a respectful distance as they finalized the settlement. The judge approved their agreement, Neurasoft received their compensation, and the collaborative framework was established. The case was officially closed 3 weeks after their dinner. The day after the final hearing, Victoria received a bouquet of wildflowers at her office, not the typical roses or lilies, but vibrant, unusual blooms. The card reads simply, "Contexts change, dinner tomorrow." Victoria smiled, tracing the handwritten words with her finger. She texted him a single word: "Yes." Their first official date was at a symphony concert, followed by a late dinner at a rooftop restaurant. William was different outside the courtroom and conference rooms, more relaxed, funnier, with a quiet intensity that drew her in. They talked until the restaurant closed, reluctant to end the evening. "I've been wanting to do this since that first day in court," William admitted as they walked to her car. "What date opposing counsel?" Victoria teased. "Get to know the brilliant woman who challenged everything I thought I knew," he corrected, taking her hand. "Who saw through corporate defenses to the heart of the matter." "And what matter is that?" He stopped walking, turning to face her. "The matter of recognizing something valuable when you see it." Their first kiss was gentle, questioning and then not gentle at all, months of tension dissolving into something new and exhilarating. Over the following weeks, Victoria discovered layers to William she couldn't have imagined during their legal battle. He was intensely private despite his public role, preferred books to television, and volunteered teaching coding to underprivileged kids on weekends. He took her hiking in the mountains, challenging her fear of heights. She introduced him to her favorite obscure films, delighting in his genuine engagement with her passions. Their professional worlds remained carefully separated. Victoria recused herself from any cases involving Westridge, maintaining her ethical boundaries even as their personal relationship deepened. 3 months into their relationship, William invited Victoria to accompany him to a tech conference in San Francisco. They extended the trip to include a weekend driving down the coast, stopping at small towns and hidden beaches. Standing on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, William wrapped his arms around her from behind. "I've been thinking about our first meeting," he said. Victoria leaned back against him. When I was determined to prove your company had stolen my client's intellectual property, he laughed softly. Yes, that delightful encounter. Do you know what I thought when I first saw you walk into that courtroom? That you were in trouble. That too, he admitted. But mostly I thought, this woman is going to change my life. Victoria turned in his arms. Is that what I've done, in ways I never expected, he said seriously. You challenge me, you make me better. 6 months later, William surprised Victoria by taking her back to the courthouse where they'd first met. Confused, she followed him up the steps. Why are we here? She asked as they stood in the now empty lobby. William took both her hands in his. Because this is where everything changed for me. Where I met the woman who would make me question everything I thought I knew about what matters in life. He dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring with a unique setting, not the traditional diamond solitaire, but an intricate design of interlocking bands, symbolizing their intertwined paths. Victoria Frost, you walked into this building as my opponent and walked out as the woman who would capture my heart. Will you marry me? Tears filled Victoria's eyes as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes. Their wedding took place a year later in the botanical gardens with a small gathering of family and friends. The founders of NeuraSoft attended, now partners with Westridge in a thriving collaborative venture that had exceeded everyone's expectations. Victoria's father, a retired judge, performed the ceremony. As they exchanged vows, William held her gaze with the same intensity he'd shown that first day in court. From adversaries to allies to soulmates, he said in his vows, you've been my greatest challenge and my greatest joy. Victoria smiled through happy tears. I promise to advocate fiercely for my clients, she replied. I never expected to find someone who would advocate just as fiercely for us. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, Victoria reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them here. She had walked into that courtroom determined to win a case, never imagining she would ultimately win something infinitely more valuable. 2 years later, Victoria sat in her home office reviewing a contract while William worked nearby, both of them occasionally glancing at the baby monitor showing their sleeping 6-month-old daughter, Emily. They had found a balance. Victoria had become a partner at her firm but worked flexible hours, while William had restructured Westridge's leadership to allow him more family time. Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out? Victoria asked, looking up from her work. William smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip. If you had won that case outright, or if I had, if we had remained on opposite sides, she clarified, if we hadn't found that middle ground. He moved to perch on the edge of her desk, taking her hand. I think we would have found each other anyway, he said confidently. Some opponents are destined to become allies. Victoria smiled, thinking of the fierce courtroom battle that had become a love story neither of them had anticipated. Their legal conflict had been real, their professional ethics never compromised, and yet somehow, in finding resolution for their clients, they had discovered something extraordinary for themselves. From opposing counsel to co-counsel for life, she mused, rising to kiss him. The best kind of settlement, William agreed, pulling her close. One where everyone wins. As if on cue, Emily's soft cries came through the monitor. They shared a smile and went together to their daughter's room, partners in the greatest case they would ever take on, the case for love, family, and a future neither could have imagined that first day in court.